Hello and welcome back to Mr. Chalmers, series on supplements for teaching within a New Zealand context, especially from home. Today I'm going to look at inferring or inference. One that you can say, how do we really need inference? We use it every day. Even in oral language, we have idioms, we have expressions, and to be fair, we just have to get through life with generalizations. They're not always correct, and sometimes I guess they can get us into trouble. But give you an example, say visiting the bank. I'm not going to want to have to explain a lot about the need to visit the bank if it's in the general context of something to do with what the bank's function is, money. So in terms of an author writing, they need to not write a whole lot of pages explaining things that you already know or they expect you to know. And hopefully if there's a bit of lack of clarity, then what comes before and what comes after helps you be decisive about deciding exactly what's happening. And the story that if you're reading, you can't see all the visual items there. So it can be done informally. It's not just literacy text as a task to read a book and say, so tell me, what's the character thinking? What do you know? What can you predict? We're doing it all the time in daily life. It seems to appear on all levels of the New Zealand curriculum, so from level 1 up. And I think that's kind of exciting that it can get a lot more complex. And the example I'll use later is it takes a degree of comprehension to answer the questions, but you can start off really early with some dynamic tasks. Sheena Cameron's got one where you get an envelope and you put objects in it. You could do this from home. You could do little paper cutouts of significant objects that appear in the story, and those objects are going to relate to a character. So we're kind of into symbology. And to give you an example, using J.R. Tolkien, but I guess it's a good one, is Bilbo. Obviously, he's got the ring. We all know about the ring. Elsa in the story, he uses his elven sword, and he also uses the Arkenstone from the elves. So if you put those in an envelope after your child had read The Hobbit and brought them out, you could ask them, why were these important objects to Bilbo? And you could get some interesting answers out of that. The author's going to lean towards there's going to be a greater symbolism in why they've included objects in the book, and we like to associate symbols and motifs. You're probably into filmmaking and something a bit further on down in life, but I think to explain why we're doing something could be useful to a student, even if they're not at that level yet, to say, we watch films and the makers of the film have a reason that they decided to make the film, so let's think about what is the purpose here. And in a nursery rhyme, it's fairly apparent. You kind of get the moral at the end that appears through all types of literature and media to a lesser or more degree. And so that envelope thing, you can make it a bit more complex. You can reverse it back, and you could say, okay, you've just read a book, or I've read a book to you. You pick some objects and draw them and cut them out and make them, and then you tell me why the objects you've selected you think are important to that character. Okay, so just to take one example for Bilbo, it is a method of escape, is the invisibility of the ring. So one might imagine that the story could have panned out a lot different for him if he didn't have the ring, and then you could extend that on to greater things about what the ring symbolizes and his journey, but it can be approached at a fairly simple level. I was trying to think of like some nursery rhymes or Harry McCleary. It could be a bit harder to say, has a dog got any objects? But if you want to go a bit more abstract, you can see that the one where his just right profile gets him through, where all the other dogs get stuck or left behind, there's sort of non-physical object symbolism there too. So I hope that helps paint a picture around what inference is in particular to school and teaching, and it could be a bit different than when you went through school. I would say it feels like in EASTO there's a greater emphasis on both. You have to do inferring and you need to use what's in the text. So I think it's quite likely the teacher will ask them while they're doing their reading test, tell me what you know about such and such, and the answer requires something that's in the text and definitely something that isn't, and combining those with your answer at the same time. And I think it's important to get your head around how that's been approached, because I guess the student can reach for the most immediate answer, the obvious one, like, oh yeah, like he's on a ship, he's a pirate, it's obvious, like that's what he does. And to say, well, the text states some things and it doesn't state everything, but what do you know? What do we know about pirates? And I believe they're expected to articulate their answer back in a way that's showing that they're using those two skills combined to strongly justify their answer. And inference is, I guess, the harder one to describe and foster and teach and get into the language of saying, I can clearly see you understood what's happening in the story. I want you to describe back to me in your own words what you know or what you can conclude, deduce from your inference. So I hope that's been helpful to unpack that one. Bye.